I've got a great idea this month. Let's use an old favorite to make some Christmas cards. One has a little more bling, one doesn't need it. Hello, and welcome back to Laurie's Something New with Something Old, where I showcase one of my favorite old products from Altenew. This month, we're using the Beautiful Day stamp and die set, the Leaves and Berry stencil, and red and green inks. For the flower, I'm using burnt red, crimson, and velvet crisp dye inks. And for the leaves, I'm using Grassfield and Shadow Creek. For the background, limestone. I'm also going to be using the woodless coloring pencils for the supporting images. I'm using Grassfield and Shadow Creek for the leaves and crimson for the flowers. I'm excited to be using the stamp wheel, which will allow us to stamp multiple images on the same piece of paper. We're going to get 4 flowers on this piece of paper, and you'll need a piece of cardstock that is 7.5 inches square. We're going to start with the outline stamp, and we'll put it up in the corner. We're going to end up putting the stamp in all 4 corners as we are able to turn the stamp wheel. We'll use obsidian ink, pigment ink, a nice black, to stamp the outline image. Then what we're going to do is we're going to turn the stamp wheel 90 degrees. But before we do that, we want to line up the solid stamp on top of the outline stamp that we've just stamped. Turning the wheel 90 degrees. There we go. Notice that the outline stamp is still on the stamp wheel because we're going to stamp that one again in the next corner. So the outline is always the pigment ink, and then we're going to use burnt red, crimson, and velvet, and we're starting with the burnt red for the solid image, which is the lightest color. So I've stamped the black on the outline and the burnt red on the solid, and so we've got 2 going now. I have found that my inks probably need to be re-inked, and I need to stamp that solid image several times to get a nice good coverage. Always the burnt red goes on the solid image. After that's done, I'm going to turn it again 90 degrees. Before I do anything else, I'm going to put the next layer on top of that first flower and line that up. This is going to be the next darkest color that I'm going to use there. So turning my stamp wheel 90 degrees so that the solid now lines up with that second flower, and I'm starting a 3rd flower in the lower right-hand corner. Burnt orange always goes on the solid, and for the second layer we're using crimson. obsidian on the outline. I'm being repetitive here so you can get the idea. Burnt red on the solid image, and then crimson on that second layer. Everything gets turned. So now we're stamping the next flower in the lower right-hand corner. So that first one looks good with that second layer. And the crimson needs, excuse me, the burnt red needs another layer or two. And now I'm putting the crimson for the second layer on that second flower. Lining up the last layer on that first flower. Turning my wheel. And then we'll ink them all over again. So the obsidian goes on the outline. The burnt red goes on the solid image. The crimson goes on the second layer. And the velvet now is going to go on that last layer, or the darkest. And there we go. First layer, the first flower is all done. The third flower needs another stamp of the burnt red. And then that one is the darkest. There we go. So first flower is done. I'm adding the second layer. Oh, there's Kitty coming to visit. So each time I'm adding the same color ink to the same stamp, but rotating my stamp wheel so that I can get 4 flowers on one piece of paper. And once I have one of the flower stamps lined up, then I don't have to line them up again because I just rotate and they all fit. Now I'm going to do the leaves, and I have space on here for 2 leaves. I actually have space on there for 4 leaves. So this is going to be, I believe this is the, oh, that's the grass field. Yeah. Not the, yeah, it's the little cube, not the big ink thing next to me. And then for this one, I'm going to rotate all the way around, although I could rotate 90 degrees and get all 4 leaves on there. Line up the second layer. And then grass field goes on the solid image. And Shadow Creek goes on the second layer. And I see when I filmed this, I forgot to do the outline layer. The leaves look fine like that, but if you wanted the outline layer, do that first in the obsidian. Now I'm cutting all the pieces out. Now what I'm going to do is stamp the supporting images. And as it turned out, I only used that long piece in the card that I made. I didn't need all the other ones, but I stamped them all just in case I wanted to use them. And what I'm doing is I'm hoping that I can get all those on the top half of that card, so I'm measuring there to make sure that it will fit. So I can get all of those stamped twice by just turning the stamp wheel around. And I saw that I couldn't get another one in there. Now I'm going to use the the green fields to color in the leaves of those long arrangements, and then Shadow Creek just to make it a little darker at the base, and then I'm coloring the flowers in with the red. You can see one that I've already done there. And I'm using the darker green there just to give it a little more weight at the base of the leaves. And notice I didn't bother to color the other supporting images, the other flowers, because I wasn't going to use them. If you want to add some bling, I used black stickles for the little dots, the little stamens on the flowers. You can see off to the left that I've got one already done. And then I'm going to use that yellow stickles for the center. I also thought I'd put some of the red stickles on the flowers on the long branch. This is not necessary if you don't have the stickles. Notice that the image I showed you at the beginning of the video, one had bling and one did not. It looks just as good without it. You want to step it up a little bit, add some bling. Now that I have all my flowers and leaves and supporting images colored and decorated and blinged up, I'm going to do the background. So I'm using my stamp wheel as a sticky mat to hold my paper and stencil in place while I ink blend. That is just a spacer so that I can get that centered right on the middle of my stamp wheel. You can purchase that separately. And there's my Leaves and Berries stencil. Pushing down on the sides there so that it sticks to that sticky mat, and then I don't need to tape it down. And I'm using limestone. It's one of the lighter grays because I just wanted a subtle background. If you don't want any background at all, don't do this part. And that's what it looks like. I forgot to tell you what sentiment stamp set I used. That's the Halftone Holidays. Now I thought for the sentiment that I would stamp it in the Christmas in red, and then I want have yourself a merry little in black, but I didn't want the black to get onto the Christmas, so I put a little piece of tape there. To cover up the word Christmas so I don't get black ink on it when I stamp the sentiment above it. And then I'm pulling that tape off so that it doesn't get on the paper. And then what I'm doing here is I'm using embossing ink, and I'm going to heat emboss with clear embossing powder just to give it a little more bling. I'm gluing down all the pieces after I've got them the range I want, and I'm using press and seal to hold all the pieces together so that I can turn it over and put all the pieces down at one time once the glue is on. And here are the final two cards again. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I'll see you next month for Laurie's Something New with Something Old.